What's up guys, welcome to another range day. Today we're going to be shooting my Palmetto State Armory AKV. Guys, if you enjoy the content that I'm making, then please make sure to like and subscribe and leave me a message down in the comments section. I hate asking, but it really does help the algorithm a lot, so I'd really appreciate it. And if you ring the bell icon, you should get notifications when new videos are released as well. Additionally, if you want more Chester's Hobbies content, you can follow me on Instagram where you can see what I'm working on and get previews of upcoming videos. And I'm also pretty active on Reddit if you'd like to follow along with the conversations there. Alright, well that's enough of that, so back to the gun of the day, my PSA AK-V. So I purchased this gun all the way back in early 2020 when I originally got the itch for a 9mm AK. Like a lot of people, I was very much torn between getting the PSA AK-V or the K-USA KP9. So while the primary focus of the video today is the AK-V, I'm going to be doing a direct comparison today with my K-USA KP9 as well, so hopefully that'll be helpful for those of you that are on the fence and trying to make a decision. Now when I first decided to get a 9mm AK, there were a few reasons I ultimately decided to go with the AK-V over the KP9. Obviously you know by now that I eventually ended up getting both, but let's talk about why I got the AK-V first. So at the time there were a few primary reasons I went with the AK-V. The AK-V was a little bit less expensive, and the fact that it also accepted the excellent CZ Scorpion magazines was a big bonus for me since I already had a bunch of them on hand. Additionally, PSA Scorpion compatible AKV magazines are great as well and extremely affordable. Lastly, I really like the clever addition of a last round bolt hold open with a bolt release lever. It seemed like a nice improvement to the general AK design. Now my AKV was originally purchased with the Magpul furniture and an SPA3 brace. I don't think the Magpul furniture is the most attractive or interesting AK furniture out there personally. It's fairly vanilla in my opinion, but I do think that it looks decent and it's very functional, so I've stuck with it so far. Eventually when I converted it to an SBR, I added the B5 stock and the BCM vertical grip, which I installed backwards for extra leverage similar to what you would get with a traditional AK dong. I think both the stock and vertical grip really add a lot to the stability and controllability of the platform. I also added a Fortis QDM plate to the buffer tube that I like to use with my Savvy Sniper sling. Now originally I didn't get the ALG AKT trigger, but I added it later and it's phenomenal. These are some of my favorite triggers and I have them on several of my AKs. On the railed and hinged dust cover I have a Vortex Crossfire red dot, and up at the front I have an Inled We Trust extended tri-lug adapter that I like to use with my Dead Air Wolfman suppressor. The extended adapter was needed to be able to attach a suppressor without the pin front sight getting in the way. I haven't actually shot my AKV in a while, so I'm really looking forward to this. I'm going to be doing some in-depth direct comparisons with my KP9, so make sure to stick around to the end of the video to hear my thoughts on the differences between the two. Alright guys, so that's what we got going on for today, so let's hit the range and have some fun with these 9mm AKs. So guys, I want to give you an idea of the difference between shooting the AKV and the KP9, both unsuppressed versus suppressed with good subsonic ammo. So I'm going to start off with 2 shots unsuppressed with supersonic ammo, slow fire into the dirt, and then I'm going to attach my dead air Wolfman in short configuration and fire 2 more shots suppressed with subsonic ammo, again slow fire into the dirt. Then I'll do the exact same thing with the KP9 so you can hear the difference between the 2 platforms. Alright, so let's start off with the AKV unsuppressed. Okay. Suppressed. Guys, these guns are so much fun. I absolutely love them. So starting with the AKV, it really just wants to go fast. The ALG trigger plays a big part in that, but it's also really fast cycling. It doesn't have the sluggish bolt movement that you get in delayed actions like the MP5, for example. It's direct blowback and has a pretty heavy bolt, so you definitely feel it when you're shooting. The recoil is pretty aggressive and violent feeling, but also completely manageable. I would say the recoil impulse is pretty similar to the CZ Scorpion, but since the AKV is a little bit heavier, I think there's slightly less felt recoil here. The ergonomics are great. I obviously love AKs in general, and while I don't think that the way I have my AKV set up is necessarily the most aesthetically pleasing, it's honestly extremely comfortable to shoulder and very functional overall. The Magpul handguard and BCM vertical grip in particular is really comfortable, and the same goes for the Magpul MOE pistol grip. The last round bolt hold open is definitely a nice feature and works really well, and using the bolt release can definitely speed up reloads over a traditional AK manual of arms. I'm a big fan of Scorpion magazines, and they do insert really smoothly into the AKV magwell with one caveat. Although the magwell itself is flared, there's a little lip on the inside that keeps magazines tight and wobble free when inserted. Sometimes if you're loading quickly, I find it can be easy to hit that lip and slow down the reload a little bit while meeting some resistance. To get around this, I found that if I aim for the front of the magwell towards the barrel of the gun, I almost always miss that lip and get a nice smooth insertion. So at the end of the day, it's really a training thing, but something to keep in mind. It's also worth noting that while CZ Scorpion magazines do technically work in the AKV, I find the lockup on the PSA mags to be tighter than some of my standard Scorpion mags, and the steel reinforced feed lips on the PSA mags are a really nice feature as well. I don't normally like AR stocks on AKs, but I have to say that this B5 stock is extremely comfortable on the shoulder and cheek, and I'm really happy with it from a functional point of view. It also suppresses really well. I had no issues at all with gas, but it is a 10.5-inch barrel, so it can be hard to keep subsonic ammo subsonic. It also has a direct blowback operation, so it's certainly not the quietest suppressor host, but it's still effective and a ton of fun to shoot suppressed. Alright, now the moment I'm sure many of you have been waiting for, let's compare the AKV to the KP9. Now, I put just over 200 rounds to the AKV today and about 100 rounds to the KP9 for this comparison. While I originally picked up my AKV in 2020, I didn't get the KP9 until early 2022, so it's a little bit newer for me. I actually made a video on my KP9 shortly after I converted it to an SBR, so I'll put a link in the the description to the original video so you can see my initial thoughts there if you're interested. Now aesthetically, I'm completely obsessed with the way I've set up my KP9. I love the Zenitco furniture. It's extremely functional and comfortable and looks awesome in my opinion. Now I think I have these guns set up pretty well for this comparison because they're both SBRs with stocks and vertical grips, and they both have the same excellent ALG trigger, so I think it's going to be a pretty even playing field. So starting with the magazines, I've got some KP9 magazines here on the left and then the AKV magazines on the right. The KP9 magazines are a lot more expensive than CZ Scorpion or PSA AK-V magazines, so that's definitely a factor to consider. The PSA magazines even have steel reinforced feed lips, which is an upgrade over the OEM Scorpion mags and KP9 mags as well. That said, I do think that the KP9 magazines are great, and there are some less expensive puff gun magazines available as well, like you see here on the left, that are more in line with the Scorpion magazine pricing. However, I do have to say that in my experience, the puff gun magazines haven't been quite as reliable for me, so I don't really feel comfortable recommending them too strongly. When it comes to reloads, I find that even though the KP9 has a smaller mag well, magazine insertion is considerably smoother for me on the KP9. I think that's because the magazines don't lock up quite as tightly, so there's a little bit more room for error when inserting the magazine in the KP9, whereas the AKV magazines have a tighter lockup, and therefore I find them to be a little bit more finicky with insertion angles. Another factor worth noting when it comes to reloads is that the paddle magazine release lever on the AKV is much larger and easier to grab under stress than the relatively thin KP9 paddle release lever. This makes grabbing and releasing magazines a little bit quicker and more natural on the AKV for me. Now both guns feature a hinged and railed top cover, and in my experience both work great with minimal or no loss in zero after opening and closing the cover for any sort of routine cleaning. For what it's worth, the AKV top cover does seem to be significantly tighter and more difficult to open than the KP9, which could potentially result in a more repeatable zero for the AKV, but honestly I really haven't had any issues with either. The KP9 has fully traditional AK style sights with a rear leaf sight, while the AKV has a traditional front sight with a pistol style rear sight. The benefit to me here is that the AKV irons are a perfect co-witness with my Vortex red dot. I think I could probably get the same type of co-witness with my KP9, but the hollow sun that I chose for this gun does sit a little bit higher, which makes it impossible to see the iron sights when looking through the dot. It's not a big deal, that's why I have the cheek riser on the stock. It's just something worth noting. One of the biggest differences for me between the AKV and the KP9 that I don't see a lot of people talking about is the charging handle and bolt throw. The AKV has a really short bolt throw when racking the charging handle, which for me as someone who loves AKs does take me out of the experience just a little bit. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the function of it, and it's part of what actually helps increase the cyclic rate, but it just doesn't feel as visceral as a traditional AK to me. That certainly may not be something that matters to everyone, so keep that in mind. It very much could be a me thing. Now by contrast, the KP9 has a full-length bolt throw, which feels much more like a traditional AK, and oddly enough, that was actually one of the things that got me to start looking into getting the KP9 because I really wanted that visceral feel on a 9mm AK. While I do try to get out to the range and shoot as much as possible, I do end up doing a lot of dry fire practice as well, so being able to rack the charging handle without it locking back on an empty magazine just like a standard AK is something I really personally enjoy. Honestly, this is really a pretty minor difference in the grand scheme of things, but for me it's a difference in the overall experience that's worth noting. Now the KP9 takes Vityaz pattern furniture and the AKV takes AKM furniture, which technically makes the AKV a little bit more versatile in terms of what it can take for furniture and gives the AKV more extensive aftermarket potential. For me personally, I really wanted Zenitco furniture for this one, and they do make furniture specifically for the Vityaz, so that worked out great for me. I also love that the KP9 has a traditional push button side folder rear trunnion. Now obviously this works great with my Zenitco PT3 stock, but it also works great with their triangle brace and triangle stock as well. And there's even a notch for the brace and triangle stock to lock up on the left side of the gun by the handguard, which is pretty neat. Now the AKV can come with the traditional AR style buffer tube as I have it set up here, or with the 1913 Picatinny rail adapter to allow all manner of SIG style stocks and braces. If I was to go back in time, I would probably have gone with the 1913 adapter on the rear trunnion instead because I like having the ability to fold my stocks. But in terms of the actual shooting experience, I think this B5 stock feels fantastic. Now the KP9 doesn't have last round bolt hold open, which makes it very accurate to the Vityaz platform and more true to the traditional AK experience. But the last round bolt hold open in the AKV could easily be seen as a functional improvement of the AK manual of arms. The safeties on both of them are great. I think PSA does an excellent job with their enhanced style safeties, making them very easy to actuate, which is unlike a lot of AKs out there that need to have their safety levers bent significantly before they can be quickly utilized with one finger under pressure. The KP9 safety was originally a standard style safety that worked fine, but I added the Krebs custom KP9 enhanced safety, and I would say that they're just about equal now. One thing that both of these guns have going for them that's absolutely fantastic is these ALG AKT triggers. Now the AKV can actually come with them from the factory, but mine didn't, so I had to install it afterwards, and the KP9 typically doesn't come with one either. But this is definitely the biggest upgrade that I'd recommend for both platforms. One of my absolute favorite triggers to run. They're just so light with a nice short and tactile reset. It's really easy to run the gun fast with them. As far as the pistol grip goes, I do think that the Magpul pistol grip is more comfortable for me. The grip on the KP9 can easily be swapped out, I just haven't done it yet. I think it's just a little bit thin on the top for me, and there's really no texture there, so it's a little bit slippery. I'll probably put something like a Tango down grip on there at some point. The standard KP9 grip works absolutely fine, it's just not my favorite. Now in base configurations, I think the KP9 is typically a little bit lighter than the AKV, but the way I have them set up here, my KP9 is actually almost the exact same weight as my AKV. So my AKV weighs 7 pounds 9.3 ounces with an empty magazine, as you see it here. My KP9 weighs 7 pounds 10.5 ounces with an empty magazine, so about an ounce heavier. I often use an Angstead Arms Blastwave Trilug device on my KP9, which adds almost 7 ounces to the muzzle end of the gun, but I took that off for this comparison so they would be on a more even playing field. Alright, now let's get into the good stuff. In terms of felt recoil, I think the KP9 has a bit less felt recoil in my experience. That could partially partially be because of the extra weight or the muzzle brake style tri-lug device I'm using, but I actually think that it's mostly due to the longer bolt throw of the KP9. So the cyclic rate is slower and less aggressive, and the bolt is also traveling for a longer period of time, which almost has the effect of delaying the feel of the recoil ever so slightly. Now the faster cyclic rate of the AKV, in my opinion, does result in a slightly more abrupt and violent recoil impulse, but also pulls you back on target pretty quickly, which makes it really easy to shoot fast. When shooting them side by side, it was very noticeable to me that the KP9 bolt is moving significantly slower than the AKV. I mentioned that the recoil feels almost delayed. I certainly don't want to give the impression that the KP9 is MP5-like in its recoil impulse, but when compared directly to the AKV, I think the difference was very noticeable to me. Now, one thing I find really interesting with 9mm PCCs is that heavier recoil doesn't necessarily mean that it's slower back on target. On the contrary, I actually think that the AKV is a little bit faster on target because the bolt is moving so fast that you basically feel the recoil in your shoulder and then it pulls you back on target. When shooting them side by side, I found that the KP9 had a little bit more circular sight movement, while the AKV was a little bit more straight up and down and tighter in comparison. Now, where things really got interesting was when I started shooting these guns suppressed. Now, the biggest difference between the two that's worth noting is the barrel length. The AKV has a 10.5-inch barrel, while the KP9 has a 9.25-inch barrel. So that means that even with good quality subsonic ammo, you might have a bit of trouble keeping that ammo subsonic in the AKV. Whereas I found with the KP9 on a day like today, the subsonic ammo stayed subsonic just a little bit easier than the AKV. To my ears, I found the KP9 to be just a little bit quieter suppressed than the AKV, and that could partially be because of the extra velocity, but I also think it has something to do with the speed of the bolt unlocking on the AKV being just so fast. Now keep in mind they're both direct blowback, so neither one is going to be the quietest suppressor host out there, but I think the bolt moving just a little bit slower in the KP9 helps it out a little bit here. But the big thing that I noticed that actually really surprised me when I first started comparing them both suppressed, the recoil impulse of the AKV gets even more violent when shooting suppressed, which makes sense because you are adding a lot of extra back pressure, but somehow the recoil of the KP9 gets even softer. I've had this happen with a couple of my other guns and I'm not exactly sure what causes it, but the KP9 is just really pleasant to shoot suppressed. I shot the first few rounds suppressed in each of them back to back, and if you look closely you can see me hesitate after shooting the KP9 for the first time. I was legitimately surprised at how slow the bolt was moving and how soft the recoil impulse was. While I wouldn't necessarily say that the KP9 is MP5-like in its recoil impulse unsuppressed, I would actually say that the slowness of the bolt almost feels similar to an MP5 when shooting suppressed. Again, it's definitely not as soft and not as flat shooting as an MP5 by any stretch of the imagination when shooting suppressed, but compared to the AKV, it's a very noticeable difference in my opinion. So in my opinion, I think they're both great hosts and the tri-lug adapter works great on both of them, but if one of your primary goals is shooting suppressed, I would probably recommend the KP9 over the AKV. Now lastly, in terms of overall appeal, I have to say that the KP9 for me wins the cool factor contest because it's basically a one-to-one recreation of the legit Russian Vityaz that I've loved using in games like Rainbow Six Siege. It's just so cool to have something that legit and accurate to the original in that sense. Now by contrast, the AKV from PSA is essentially just a 9mm AK with some thoughtful manual of arms improvements. Now don't get me wrong, that's not a bad thing by any means, and in some ways for some people that actually might make it a logical choice over the KP9 like it did for me originally back in 2020. The bolt hold open and bolt release lever, coupled with the iron sight design, oversized paddle mag release, CZ Scorpion style magazines, and standard AKM style furniture make the AKV less authentic but arguably more user friendly for someone that just wants to shoot their guns and have them be functionally sound and efficient. But for me personally at this point, now that I've had significant time with both platforms, I would say that I absolutely love them both and I'm really glad that I have both of them. But if I had to pick one, I think the AKV is just slightly more vanilla and the KP9 really has that cool factor that really does it for me. The KP9 to me also has a more pleasant recoil impulse and feels like a legit AK, and of course I love the Zenitco furniture, so all that adds up to me just slightly preferring the KP9 over the AKV personally, even though you could very easily make the argument that the AKV is actually improved on the classic Vityaz design with some of the changes they made. With all that being said, both guns are awesome, tons of fun, reliable, and effective pistol caliber carbines. I love them both and I honestly can't imagine anyone being overly disappointed in either one. It's really just a matter of personal preference and what you're specifically looking for in a 9mm AK. Hopefully this comparison was helpful for anyone considering one of these for their own collection. So that's going to be all for today guys. We got a lot more videos coming up soon, including more PCCs, AKs, ARs, handguns, and shotguns. So remember to like and subscribe, ring the bell, stay tuned, and thanks for stopping by.